session, in fact, the first session of the day, burning priorities to make young India an employment success story. India is a fast-growing land of opportunities, as I mentioned. But is the job generation happening where the talent is? Or are there enough talent where the jobs are generating? The cluster effect is slowly becoming an interesting lookout point for the fast-growing companies. This panel will have discussions to understand the dynamics across industries and try to identify a way forward. And your involvement as audience, as the HR leaders who are coming from various industries and various sectors, will be very acquainted, because we would get to know about what are the things that your experiences during the question and answer sessions that you will be throwing up to us. May I request Naveen Anirudh Mascarenhas, Director, India Operations Pontoon Solutions from Adecco Group, to kindly join us on the stage. He will be the session chief of panel 1. Along with him, may I request Tyagarajan, Global Head Talent Supply Chain at HCL Technologies, to kindly come on the dais. Mr. Raghavendra K, Senior Vice President and Head HRD, Infosys BPO. Ms. Richa Dubey, Head Human Resource, India and ME Praxair. Sriram Varahan, Head HR, Business Partners Ops Center, India, Thomson Reuters. Please put on a welcome for all the panelists and the chief moderator, and we hope to hear them in the next 45 minutes. Thank you so much.
I'd like to kind of start off with a couple of thank yous. First is with the Indian Staffing Federation for having us here over, kind of congregate to discuss a very key theme that impacts us all in different shapes and forms. Secondly, thank you, Mr. Honorable Minister, for joining us this morning. And most importantly, thank you panelists, Richa, Raghav, Sriram, and Tyagarajan, who have taken out their time to join this discussion. So, like Suchita said a while ago, the theme is about the burning priorities for young India. So, when you kind of look into the details, it's more about, in essence, demand-supply mismatch. Okay, but of course, it's not as straightforward as I put it across now. So let me kind of start this conversation with a little bit of data facts. So you heard a lot of statistics this morning, and I'll continue the drill. I'm sure data is something that some of us enjoy, some of us get bored to death, but either way, whichever direction it takes, we'll start with that, because I just want to kind of highlight the success story that India Inc. is, and then give you the exact opposite devil's advocate view. So we're talking about what are the bright sides of the Indian economy, right? We're talking about a GDP as on June 2015 at 7.3%, right? We're talking about 2.65 contribution to the global GDP that India alone does. We're talking about 17.5% of the world population that India has. We're talking about the 9th largest economy in the world, which is by the end of 2015 projected to be the 7th largest economy in the world. Right? We are the 3rd biggest in GDP in Asia Pacific. We are 8% of Asia's GDP. We have 6.83 contribution to the global GDP in terms of purchasing power parity. We have 12.8 million workforce entering into the Indian job market every single year. In agriculture services, we are number 2. In services, we are number 11. And in industries and engineering manufacturing, we are number 12 as far as the growth is concerned. The flip side of this entire story, so I've told you the bright side, right? So this is a great success story that we have seen over the last 2 decades that India has been witnessing. So what's the flip side? It's a little too ironic that a country of 1.24 billion population is kind of faced with underemployment, unemployment scenarios, skill mismatch issues, where 60% of the Indian organizations continue to believe that they still can't find the right resource. They can't still find the right talent to fit their demand that is getting generated every year. So, if you look at the flip side of it, you're talking about an unemployment rate of 4.9%. You're talking about a 30% shortfall in skill sets of IT engineers. You're talking about only 4 to 7% of core engineers being fit for the job. When I'm saying core engineers, I don't necessarily mean only IT here, I'm talking across sectors. We have acute shortages in the industries like aerospace, aviation, financial services, retail services, IT, business process management. So in all forms and shapes, I think we have a pretty, a different side of the story that we are also seeing. We have only 10% of all the MBAs that are graduating in India who are actually employable, right? So, as they say, data tell, but stories sell. So the data part is finished now. So let me kind of start off this panel discussion with a couple of stories to kind of lend context to what we're going to be discussing with the rest of the panel. So there's this colleague of mine in my team. We regularly, he loves his tea, so sometimes I catch up with him to discuss about how he's doing and how's work going on and the rest of it, because I believe in having that personal equation with every individual that I work for within my team. So he comes from North Karnataka and great guy, excellent in managed services, excellent in vendor management systems. And I was just talking to him and saying that why Bangalore? Why did you even move to Bangalore? You're just so happy from your, he's so proud of his hometown that he always kept talking about it. I said, why did you even move here? He said, what do I do? How do I make my living? I don't have enough education infrastructure in that place to be able to learn anything more than the local language. I don't have the skill upgradation opportunities where I am. I moved to Bangalore, I studied here. In fact, I've learned my English after coming to Bangalore. And then I've built my skills in procurement and managed services and so on and so forth. I said, but if given a chance, if that option was created for you in your hometown, what could you do? He says, I would love to go back and stay there because my roots are there, my family is there. What do I do? So my Janmu Bhumi is different, my Karma Bhumi is different, and I think that's a common factor for all of us, right? I mean, everyone of us sitting here in some form or the other come from different cities, different socio-economic background, but we have kind of made our cut where we are, but we have done it in the Tier 1 cities. Another scenario, and most of you will probably relate to this, is when you go to a wedding within your family, right? You see some of these old aunties who come to you and say, Beta, which company do you work for? And it becomes very difficult to try to explain to them in their understanding as to where we are. So I just say, instead of saying I'm from a workforce consulting and outsourcing global multinational company, I just say I get people jobs. So the first question she pops up with, I have a son who has done a BCA and MCA. He's done all these certifications. Can you please find him a job? Because he's been trying for the last 6 months, he doesn't have a job. I met the guy, he can't speak 2 straight lines of English. Right? So, having set this theme as a point of discussion, there are 2 questions I'm opening up to this panel here that we would like to debate for the next 40 minutes. One, will job generation happen where the talent is? So we'll start off with that first question, which is the key theme. And I will go in series. I'll start off with Tyagarajan, and you can go through the flow.
Okay, good morning everybody, and we'll keep it crisp. I think a couple of perspectives come to mind right off the bat. First is, would job generation happen where the talent is? Unfortunately, it has not been happening, and that's actually the tough state of affairs in India. And one of the things, many of you, if you've been tracking the job market in India, we've had a few waves of job generation at the national level. When the Chinese aggression happened in the 60s, defense services came into play. A lot of people, if you look at the 60s and 70s, every other person went to work for the defense services. Then the nationalization of banks happened. Then a lot of people went to work for banks. So typically you would find that these waves of large employment generation last about a decade and a half. Obviously today if you look at the defense services, they don't really take as much as they used to say in the 60s and 70s. IT, if you were to look at it, it started sometime in the mid-90s. Now, the tough part for us to all acknowledge is that it's kind of run its 2-decade course. And we continue to keep hoping that IT will be the one that will actually continue to generate these millions of jobs. And already if you see the rate at which IT is generating additional employment, that's kind of plummeted. I think we need to be mindful of that. And while I, at the moment, in my current role for HCL Technologies, I have a lot of stake in the IT industry, the reality is that I think we tend to focus too much at the country level. On IT, it's very media friendly. A lot of things get talked about that. But even with all its impact, it still impacts a very small proportion of the population. So my first message is, I think, really that I don't think India is prepared for the manufacturing revolution that we actually need to drive out. And if India is to actually continue to provide employment for the 100 million youth that we keep talking about in one forum or the other, and if India is to become a powerhouse, other than just being a services backbone for the global economy, I think we need a manufacturing revolution. And I think the reality is, I don't think there is a concerted strategy at the national level to generate the kind of talent required to cater to power the manufacturing revolution. Anyway, it's kind of very tragic when you come to think of it, that in manufacturing we've not managed to take market share. Even in some of the core areas like textile exports, you'll actually find that countries like Vietnam or Bangladesh or other places are actually taking market share away. And one of the analogies I always used to say, if English could be taught in 6 months, do you think India will continue to have as much share of the IT industry? And you think China will lie low? We are banking on the fact that there are no such big revolutions in reskilling or skilling. And we seem to be quite complacent in the fact that IT will continue to keep us providing the employment opportunities. So I think key message, we should stop just talking IT and ITES. I know most of us make our bread and butter out of that, but I think really focus somewhere else. And if you look at that area, I think there's a lot of work to be done. And that's really where, and if you look at examples like what happened in Maruti, in Manesar, one of the things that came in the HR fraternity, how many industrial relations experts do we have in the last 20 years? Today, most HR professionals, if you were to look at just our own profession, would rather work in conventional IT industries, do recruiting, staffing. But some areas, already there's not many people interested in actually pursuing careers there. So you have a big dearth of talent, even to manage some situations like that. So that's really my opening set of comments, Naveen, and let Raghu and others take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, and good morning to all of you. Pleasure being here. Good to hear perspectives, and the way I would look at it is irrespective of the way one looks at it. I think ultimately today the war for talent will only become a lot more hotter, because in the past wars were fought for wealth, for geography, for women, for property or whatever, but today the war is only for talent. So whether it is where the talent is available or in the clusters where employment is actually generated, the challenge is that are we prepared at all to meet that requirement? Nathan very well touched it, telling that the demographic dividend which was there can actually end up being a demographic bulge in the center. Absolutely, people not being there. I can only compare two of the most populous countries in the world. One is China and one is India. Both have the largest populations in the world, and the rate at which we are growing will soon overtake China to become the most populous country. And the biggest advantage India has today is that while in China, because of the one-child policy and the life expectancy being a lot higher, the population there is aging much faster. And India, at this point of time, where more than 50% of our population are below the age of 25 years. And therefore, we, I think, are at a very, very strong footing at the very base level. But the question is, are we as industry, is the government, our education institutions, and NGOs actually looking at skilling the right people in terms of getting them ready to meet the current flavor of the decade, like Make in India? So for that to happen, I think we need to look at what is it we are doing to ready that population so that we actually make use of the demographic dividend. Because the way I look at it is, if one looks at China, while India and China spend crazily on defense, what sets us apart from China is China actually also has spent a lot of money in developing their own infrastructure. They spend a lot of money in terms of educating their people. The focus on equality in getting the girls also up to speed, because it's 50% of the population, readying them to take on higher jobs. which India is not doing. That's why Pallavi Iyer in her book, Smoke and Mirrors, and the story in China, that's I think the title of the book, talks about if you're rich, it's good to be born in India. If you're poor, it's better you're born in China. Because the infrastructure, the focus on education, the focus on skilling is a lot more focused there, and that makes a difference. So irrespective of whether there are jobs in the cities or where the talent is, ultimately there has to be a concerted effort in terms of what is it we're doing with this demographic dividend. I think that will be the key to all these problems.
Thank you, Raghav. So you've heard perspectives from information technology side, from the business process management. Now, it's a completely new dimension on the industrial and manufacturing side, which is going to take us through. So that's going to also kind of give us a slightly more holistic view of where we are headed. And talent shortage is not only about technology; it's also about core brick and mortar business that the entire economy survives on. And I think that's a from the topic.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you to all my panel members here, Naveen, Tyagarajan and Raghu for setting the platform. I'm picking up the threads from what Tyagi, Sachnav said and Raghu said. And talking about, Make in India and the kind of skill development we have, I think there's a big gap. So all of us are going to sound negative because there's not really anything much which we see happening. We hear about things, but we don't really see it happening. China has 2 crore apprentices every year. Japan has 1 crore. Germany 30 lakhs. Guess how many in India? 3 lakhs. 3 lakhs. Of course, some people know the data very well because we need to know it. The tragedy is, we need to train 250 million people by 2020. And by 2012-13, our target was 8.5 million and we could only train 1.4 million people. That is like a growing gap, and every year an immense large number, 10 million I think, getting added to the youth population of this country. So what do we do with this energy? This youth is the energy of this country. The Freedom Revolution was one time when the youth took over. We had a slightly declining phase after that, but when again the economy opened up, the youth took over, maybe our generation. And then it's the third phase, when we are the youngest country in the world, but what are we planning to do about it? So the gap is ever widening. And I'm very happy to see that the academia, the staffing, the corporate world and the government, I wish we had more government representatives here. If the 4 have to come together to talk about this. The corporates want people who are trained and ready to take up the job. At the same time, we don't want to pay so much. It's a real story. The academia struggles with what to do with it. The government has schemes which don't seem interconnected to our thoughts. And the youth needs employment and the right technical skills. Government schools are a tragedy on their own. I know I'm going to sound very, very sad from the time we started, but I'm sure later on we are going to talk about results as to how we are planning to go about it and to solve this issue. So what is happening at government schools? Why don't we have children who come out of schools and who can talk and who can speak, forget English, whatever, can they deliver their thoughts across? Even if it is vernacular, can they deliver? Are we grooming our kids that way? It's a big gap. Only, as rightly pointed out by Raghu, if you are rich, it's good to be born in India. You can at least get a proper education. But what happens to all those kids? So the gap is at every level. It's easier for me to talk here about what's happening, but the real experiences are very, very sad. And we need to look at it in a much quicker pace. So it's not just about discussion, but execution is very crucial at this stage. So we'll talk about it at my next round. Please, Sriram. I'm handing over to Sriram from here.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I think it's 12:05, so it's no more good morning, so good afternoon. So I have a very different perspective. So the question is, does job generation happen where the talent is? I think it's yes and no, right? In 90s, IT industry was booming, and we got lots of talent, right? So there was no issues of not having available talent, or else I don't think there's so many companies which are existing in India would have been operating at this level. Every year, there are so many organizations adding their headcount. Every year, some new organizations are coming up and setting up their organizations in India. Could be because of cost arbitrage, could be because of talent, could be, and mostly because of talent, because they know they're going to get the talent here. So it depends upon the industry, right? I mean, so the question is which industry where there's a lack of talent, then probably those industries need to come together, have a joint up approach, and go to those institutions and say, this is my road path, right? Where is that we need to bring those talent for those industries that are going to set up their, be it manufacturing. Because India was more concentrated on IT and ITS. And I don't think, although we have, we fight for the same talent, the same pool, but within Thomson Reuters, we hire people with the finance research, legal research, science research. We don't find that as a big trouble. We do get good talent available within India. And we have grown in this country. We started with some 500 people, we're 10,000 odd people in India today. So it depends upon which industry and what's the solution. It's good that we're comparing with various countries, but it's a very different problem that we're facing. It's a billion population country. Education is now getting into an existence where everybody thinks that being educated is important. We have gone through 69 years of independence and we're just getting matured there. So from that perspective, I think we may need to think through whether, I think there is talent available for certain industry and there is probably talent not available for certain industry. And maybe as an organization and as a federation, we need to work together to get that, is my perspective.
Thank you, Sriram. So, which brings us to a very topic that's probably more relevant to your respective organization, and that's pin code hiding. Because here the topic is, will job generation happen where the talent is? And we know that the talent does not only exist in Tier 1 cities, but it's also Tier 2 and Tier 3. And we also know what are the limitations of expansion in Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities, and also the same limitation that is being faced in Tier 1. Because you have this entire migrant population looking for better job opportunities, city life, moving into the main cities of India, but then the cities are also facing the strain of resources, of jobs, of talent, of space, of traffic, so many other complexities that revolve around it. But in your respective organizations, is there a perspective, or are there some initiatives, or already are there some actions that have been taken in addressing and identifying the talent in specific cities or towns in India, which probably has that talent pool and that capability and that thinking capability, and has that potential been harnessed by your respective organizations?
Absolutely, and we need to remember that every Tier 1 city was a Tier 2 city at some point. It's all a matter of where you are in the time continuum. I think, while Richa said, I think we'll certainly talk about the more optimistic side. I think the good thing about corporates is when you have a problem, you scope it, you develop some objective solutions, and you go after it with goals. And I think if we look at this as a very massive problem at a country level, we're all going to get bogged down by the very enormity and the scale. Only if you break it up into smaller parts and look at controllable elements, and that's what corporations are very good at doing. If this was to be a quarterly result issue, and we were to approach it from that perspective to say, we've got to make this happen, it will tend to happen. So I think that's the mindset. So specifically talking from the company I represent today, very live case, we've identified Lucknow and Madurai as two big hubs. We've got land from the government, and we made some serious commitments to at least have 10,000 people within the next 1.5 years. So very clearly, and this is nothing new. I mean, there could be some other cities that could get picked up. Reality is, I think it's important for corporations to continue to grow and not forget the fact that 20 years back, people had to sell Bangalore. Today we have to de-sell Bangalore because Bangalore is getting saturated. I think it's a matter of time. The other perspective, I think it's very important, looking at it from the corporate's point of view is, the way at least my company looks at it, and many other competing companies look at it, is they tend to look at what is controllable for them and what can they solve for. So in fact, HCL has just launched its own business venture called Talent Care, which is really in the education space. And the goal there is working with the skills development mission to make sure that we're actually training people for the healthcare industry, training people for the retail industry, training people for the telecom industry. Because we need to make sure that there are people available across the spectrum, because these are all large employment generation opportunities. But in reality, do we have people for the entire hospital chain, people at the right price points, at the right scale, and connecting the supply and demand? I think corporations need to step in to help there. And I think the more corporations take initiative, and they have to do that, and you call it as part of mandatory requirement from the government to dedicate 2% of your profit, or you call it part of your corporate social responsibility, whichever lens you take it. I think the important thing is to scope it and start to solve it. So I think from my vantage point, I think this problem is definitely solvable, provided we are able to identify what do we expect of corporates, what do we expect of education institutions, what do we expect of government, and what we expect of the staffing companies. I think that the important thing is who's going to be the sutradhar of this. Now, to expect that the corporates will be the sutradhar for a national agenda, it's not going to happen. But they are going to be quite biased towards their own interest. I think what is necessary, and today at the moment, the very hosting of this conference, ISF has tried to act as the sutradhar and say that let me bring all the parties together and let me try to evolve a common pattern that connects these solutions that Richa was talking about. I think solutions exist. Problem is they are in pockets. Each one believes that they're solving their own little bucket. Hopefully they all add up. The addition has to happen by somebody who's looking at the big picture. So I think that's where these forums help, and that's where we need to partner. So short answer, absolutely plans underway. We have some aggressive targets for Talent Care as well, for Lucknow and Madurai. And I'm quite pleased. In fact, 3 months back, we hosted a conference, and where, in fact, Mehul and some others were speakers. And very happy to know that even the very staffing companies who are present, they've actually gone into the smaller towns we're talking about. So we're not talking about smaller towns as something in the future. It's happened in the past, it's happening now. And today, whether it's cities like Baroda or Trichy or Nagpur or any other place, I think there are very much opportunities for us to do global work out of those places. So it's just a matter of doing more of that and committing ourselves to doing more of that.
Thank you. Raghav, your perspectives on Infosys BPS?
Yeah, but maybe before I answer that question, what I'd also like to bring to the attention of this group is also that today, close to about 65% of the workforce is being given by, is being serviced by freshers. And my understanding is in the next 5 to 6 years, this 65% will actually come down to less than 50%. And this is because of the rate of change in terms of the way businesses are done, in terms of understanding of the skills, understanding of the domain, the role of technology. So increasingly, freshers will not be getting that fillip or that head start, which they got, say, from the mid-90s till about, say, till now, where year on year, the hordes of people passing out from colleges were available for placement immediately, especially in the new age industries. I think that is coming down, and that is the main reason is the lack of skills and the lack of pace of change in the curriculum, the lack of pace in terms of what we need to do. And therefore, what we as a company have done today is in terms of looking at specific skills in tier 2, tier 3 towns. Even before the CSR bill, the company had got into a state where we are not in the business of training, we are not in the business of imparting education. But what we realized very early on is that can we look at another way of looking at getting the students passing out from the colleges in terms of the skills they would need to get honed in. And therefore, our company today has trained more than 10,000 professors in the last 7 years in terms of the 7 basic essential skills that will be required for students in tier 2, tier 3 town, their ability to transition from campus to corporate. We call it the Project Genesis. We've shared the entire content design methodology with NASSCOM, and today it is being known as the Global Business Foundation Skills Program. As I speak, we've tied up with 7 universities across different states, and in this financial year itself, we've already touched about 9,876 students by this program. what we do is we host professors from different colleges in our campus in Mysore and take them through an orientation for about 2 weeks in terms of what are the basic skills that are required for students, especially in tier 2, tier 3 towns and semi-urban areas, in terms of what is it they need to look for when they attend an interview, what are the things they should look for when they get into their first job. And it's called Project Genesis from an Infosys perspective. As I speak, we just finished 2 batches, one in Mysore and one in Dharwad, which had about 60 to 70 professors in both the locations. We regularly run programs in Coimbatore, in Pune, and also in Jaipur in terms of running these programs. We've got requests, we've done a program just last month in Vizag. So the question is there a will to ensure that the skills that need to be imparted is there with the corporates? The second thing as a company is that while the industry can do only that much, are there enough stakeholders in putting their skin in the teeth? While we did this very aggressively in a particular state, while we tried in a particular state to get the same thing going, it didn't move. But when they saw that this worked in the other state, the next state has come forward and said, please ask our government teachers to undergo this program. So I think we need to also build in a sense of excitement, a sense of non-availability of a particular skill set to make their students in their state slightly less advantaged. I think there are different approaches which we need to do, and today we are running this program in 5 states in India. Believe me, it's not easy, because you need to go through the red tape, you need to go through the bureaucracy, and what's in it for me are typical challenges which we face. But so the next option which we looked at was to look at autonomous colleges, autonomous universities, and start giving them the benefit of this initiative. And that built in a sense of competition. Because in my view, while autonomous colleges and universities probably are better prepared, but if they're from tier 2, tier 3 towns, they're actually reaping the benefit. And seeing these universities coming forward to do this, we have today the government institutions too, coming forward to be part of this program. So I think that's the way we need to look at in terms of building in a sense of competition, showing the clear advantage of incorporating that in their curriculum. Probably build it as an elective in their, and they're not going to replace education, but the focus is on skill development. That is what we need to look at, so that students are ready to transition from campus to corporate.
Thank you, Raghav. So we're just kind of switching gears here to discuss the classic chicken and egg dilemma. So we have answered the first question through the panel's perspectives on how can jobs be generated where the talent is. Now let's just flip the question the other way around and say, is there actually enough talent where the jobs really are, right? And so that's a classic catch-22 question that could be asked, because it's kind of interdependent. So we'd like to hear the panel's perspective, and I think this time around we'll start with Sriram. What's your take on?
Yeah, I think that's a bigger problem, I feel, because we all go for the same talent pool. And I think that's where I think there's a lot of partnership required with the colleges and institutions, etc. There are so just continuing from the previous point, we don't have any operations in tier 2, tier 3 cities. And but however, we have quite a few of employees who work out of tier 2, tier 3 cities. So we do a lot of freelancing, we do a lot of work from home kind of schedule. Most of the organizations, with the experience that we have received, is that they open up their centers in tier 2, tier 3, but their competitive advantage is to make sure that they're opening up there because they get the talent, but their compensations are very different from somebody who's getting it in tier 1, right? So somebody in Bangalore, in software engineer, is earning maybe 5 lakhs, somebody probably in Coimbatore might be earning 3 lakhs. And today, unfortunately, the rule of relativity is coming into a bigger equation. So as soon as I joined those firms, within a year's time, I am getting influenced with my friend who is working in Bangalore for 5 lakhs, whereas I am working here at 3 lakhs. And there's a huge churn that is happening. So because of that experience, what we thought is better to, rather than opening up a center in tier 2, tier 3, you could just move people to tier 2 to tier 3 get them into freelancing assignment, part-time work schedule, work from home schedule, so their compensation is protected and they are able to also stay in their hometowns and able to generate what we want to generate. That's one. From a talent perspective, I think it's important as a chapter we need to go together, do some work with institutions, right? It could be internship programs, bringing them on. And Nathan said a great point, right? I mean, bringing their professors to the organizations, maybe getting them trained so that they can go back and tell to the talent availability, these are the skills that are required for you to get engaged to the corporate world, etc. So in the interest of time, so probably that's my view.
I think I will just look at the CSR perspective of the talent management. I will look at the corporate social responsibility perspective of talent development or sponsorship, or how corporates can contribute to it, and how staffing organizations can partner and can be a bridge between the colleges and the corporate. Because, for example, I'll just give you one example of what we do in Praxair. Being a manufacturing setup at 37 locations all over India, and some part of Middle East. And what we realized is we have a huge chain of logistics. So we have around 300 plus drivers who work as temp staff with us. And what we do is we sponsor their children's education. And that's not just a government school thing which is free. And there's a limit of around 80 lakhs per student. So you can imagine how much obliged that person would be. And we don't take it away if the driver leaves the organization. It continues till a professional degree. A small change, something like a Foundation for Excellence, if you had heard about it, one of the NGOs in Bangalore, they sponsor engineering students for kids. They help corporates sponsor engineering students whose family income is less than a lakh per year. I think there's a lot happening in pockets. And what our focus can be is how do we focus on the quality of the education being provided to bring the pool up. It's not about in what large numbers are we doing and which part of the country are we doing, but are we focusing on the quality. So far as consultative role which staffing organization can play, I think one is forecasting, which they can definitely do very well, because staffing organizations do have a much better vision of what's going to come, and they see the trend, very quick, and they are on the ground. So they have so many feet in the ground. They can play a very interesting role with the corporate world to bridge this gap. So I think on one hand, when the corporates can focus on the quality, and the government has definitely started its work on the policy front, and I hope it moves faster rather than having so many state laws and central laws which many of us don't even know how to interpret, and we struggle with it. If these three things can align, we can definitely solve this issue in any part of the country. And I'm sure there are many organizations who are working from Jaipur, Gurgaon, and I know some of them have come in great places to work in that kind of list, and they are doing amazing well. I belong to a small town, and I would have loved to be there. My city, Jamshedpur, Steel City. And it's such a beautiful city. Given an opportunity, I think many of us would have liked to stay back there. It's one of the model cities, most planned and beautiful city in this country. But we all move out. There are only old people left in the city. If I recall my generation and my parents and all, we all moved out. The reason was because the pull factor which was there. If we just take it back there and we focus the quality of life, I don't think there is a real big problem. And having the kind of intelligence we have in our country, I don't think it's a big challenge. But the need of the hour is to come together, to sit in a platform like this and then get into execution. So that's all I had to say.
Sure. So, in essence, when we look at this, the two scenarios that we have, the conflicting scenarios, I think we all agree that, and we were even discussing this morning, that government agencies, policymakers, corporate organizations, staffing entities, educational institutions are all doing the right thing in their own merit, in their own space. I think it's about time for someone to bell the cat, right? Because everyone's kind of waiting for the next person to do it, and no one's doing it. But their problem is solved, but the larger macroeconomic or the employment scenario is not still salt at large. So I think there needs to be a flag bearer, and I think ISF provides that good platform for them to be the flag bearer of that industry, as well as academia, as well as the government connect. Just so that we summarize, and we just do a quick round across the panel, what do you think, very briefly, are the 3 top burning priorities to make Young India an employment success story?
Okay. I think first is, I'll give some concrete solutions. One is, we all know, there are job portals that we use. Imagine or visualize something where almost every possible job conceivable in the world, in any part of the world, is available for access to every Indian who's seeking a job. If we were to create the technology platform, today exists in small pockets, but imagine that there are opportunities for maids in Sao Paulo and nurses in Peru, and that opening was available to someone in Kerala. Of course, first is to provide, the moment you provide access through technology, the pushes and pulls will start to drive people to that marketplace. I think to create that marketplace, I think we all know it within our own space, within our industries, within our companies, we try to create the marketplace. I think somebody has to create that. So there's a big play for technology. I really think there is a big priority out there. Second thing I think in very specific pockets, we can't be general about it. The country, and this is a real action for the government, we need to know where and in which pockets we want to be net talent exporters, and we should go after that with aggression, and where we are going to employ people locally. So if we want to keep our design scientists in India, then we need to have an ecosystem for that, and if we want to export nurses outside, then we should be deliberate about that. And I think if I look at examples like Singapore or Dubai, they know very clearly. In Singapore, they would give visas to Filipinos only to work as maids. They know what they're going to invite Indians for. They know what they're going to invite Britishers for. They're very, very clear. I think India needs to be deliberate. We can't play in all the fields and expect. So some places we only net export. We don't need to employ people here and create jobs there, but we can export people and still leverage the opportunity. And the third and final priority, if you were to say, is that I think somebody, like a staffing federation or whoever, has to light the match and make sure that just as there are some government level priorities saying so many jobs have to be created, this has to become a program with some set objectives, set targets and set goals for the different stakeholders, and run it like a company level program to get those results. I think without that governance, without that tightness, we will have ended up having a great conference and good ideas shared. And after a point, believe me, if I were sitting out there, you become quite jaded when you attend a lot of conferences because you get a lot of speeches thrown at you, a lot of ideas. I think the real credibility will come when some ideas get executed. So in the morning, when I know who was mentioning that the ISF recommendation on ESI PF exemption that's been considered by the finance minister, I think we need to have more of those proof points and case studies. Only then will the credibility come up. So I think my submission is, if we're able to implement one idea out of the many things we've spoken, I think there's merit for us to come back again after a year. Otherwise, personally, I would not show up here. I would feel like it's a lot of talk. So that's really my submission. So thanks guys.
Thank you.
Very quickly, I believe that the people in this room and people like us across the different industries have a significant role to play. And while I will not talk about what the government should do or what others should be doing, I think as influencers, we can influence 3 things, which is very, very easy to do, but it requires relentlessness and resilience from our part to make it happen. One is to look at the way education is imparted in colleges, schools, and universities. Can we pressurize everyone to make a change in the way we look at education? 2 is, as industry, can we actually look at how technology can be leveraged, so that whether it's in a school or a college or in an NGO or in the government or in our own organizations, what is it we need to be doing in terms of ensuring that dissemination of information, knowledge, training skills, everything is increasing use of technology to make it work. And the third is focus a lot more instead of just generic skills, look at behavioral skills, look at domain in terms of the banking industry or in terms of analytics or in terms of the F&A skills. What are those specific areas which can make it work? I think these are the 3 things if we can, and each one of us in this room can make that work.
Thank you. I think the 3 things which we can look at is, one is NSDC is being talked about a lot. Can we stop tendering and giving the opportunity to somebody who has quoted the lowest tender? That is where we have already compromised on the quality. Please fix a base there. Okay. Second thing I feel is the measurement of what are we aiming at? Is there a measuring criteria for that? And third definitely is the communication and teamwork, the two basic core skills required to work anywhere. So I think these three things can be focused, and corporates can play a very crucial role in this.
Thanks. I don't have three things. The first is probably, as a student, I think they need to be more inquisitive. Apart from the academics that they do, they need to start learning more about what's happening in the industry, keep themselves equipped. From the institutions, they need to move away from this internship program once in 3 years to multiple internship programs for the students to move to corporate and get experience. From the government sector, I think it's important for them to look at their policy and keep changing their policies often. And if they have an idea that this is the industry, like manufacturing, this is what my target is, then they engage with the Indian Staffing Federation, ASCOM, CII, and start planning for future. Rather than, it's important not to react, but to respond. So you should be proactively engaging for future so that you can solve the problem for tomorrow rather than solving the problem for today. And finally, for corporates, I think they need to come together, go to institutions, maybe work with them to design their curriculum. Maybe look at the way where we will be able to engage those students and then able to attract the right talent, because ready-made talent is what most of the corporates are looking at. So the only way to do that is to maybe engage with the universities, create curriculum, design certain programs, send your senior leaders to interact with the students, etc. So I think those are my submissions on that.
Wonderful perspectives. Thank you, panelists. So we can, I think, summarize and say education system and the students and the individuals' initiative, technology, policy reforms, improvement in domain and soft skills, measurement of every single action that is done by every single entity and accountability for it. And of course, a flag bearer like ISF, who probably can be the industry torch bearer, will probably get these entities together to do what is right for young India for the future. So thank you very much, panelists, for all your perspectives and thought leadership. We'll probably open the floor to the audience. Probably in the interest of time, we'll just take 2 questions for now, and of course the rest of us are available for conversations.
Take 3 questions right now, and I'll request 2 questions. Okay, 2 questions as decided by the panelists, and rest maybe we can request at the lunchtime if you can interact with them. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Professor Sitaram. I'm a Dean of a Young B School in Bangalore, representing the academia. By the way, all of you are welcome in my college for industry exposure. But there's a couple of perspectives I'd like to put. Many of the colleges, maybe barring few, are restricted by the university. We are actually dictated by the curriculum of the university. In between that, we try to incorporate soft skills. Okay, and industry has been, I've been a part of training and placements for the last decade, and I see a lot of talking is coming into execution also. And I'm
so,
the beneficiary.
sorry to interject.
Yeah.
So could we pin down to what the exact question or the query you have for the panelists?
Yeah, the couple of questions which I have. The exposure comes in 2 ways when the industry comes to academia. Okay, that's one point. And when industries come, when the students come to the corporate for internship, okay, we do not see, there are a lot of data privacy issues. There is a lot of disclosure issues when students come and participate in internships. I see a lot of companies willing to give the internships, but there's a lot of constraint in terms of flexibility, in terms of information sharing, in terms of accountability from them, and what kind of training they give before they take the students for internships. I would like to point out that if industry comes out very openly with internships, with their internship policies, which are much suited to the local university or local colleges, then it really makes a lot of sense for us to send our students for internships. That is the only way students can get exposure. The pace of change of industry is much higher than the pace of change of syllabus. I agree to that, and the gaps will always remain. But internships is what we also focus on. But industries are not much open as they think or as they project. That is my question to the panel here.
Okay.
Hello. No, I think it's important for us to understand that internship is not substitution of work that somebody is doing. So I don't know where this data privacy comes into equation. I can't use an intern and ask them to do somebody's job because someone is not there as an attrition replacement. Internship is about giving them an experience on a specific project. So the most important, and those are the decisions as universities you might need to take. Just because some organization is providing you internship, please do not send them there. Please check whether there is a project which is going to help them. That project doesn't need any data privacy because there is a sponsor for that project. The project needs to clearly come over and measurables will be there. They need to present it. And in fact, you should make sure that the internship is part of your performance tracking record also. It's not just the subjects. Even those needs to be also put into equation. So please do not send them just because you're getting internship from various companies. Maybe for projects would be a better option is what I think.
Yeah, good afternoon. Myself Somnath Banerjee from Orion EduTech. See, my takeaway is from this discussion. I will go to the query very fast. प्यासा कुएं के पास आए ना आए, कुआं प्यासे के पास जाए ना जाए, प्यासे को तो कुएं के पास आना ही. Either Infosys or HCL is opening in Tier 2 or Tier 3. That might take some time, but talent they always attract from Tier 2 and Tier 3 cities. Just an example I want to give over here. 3.5 years back, we launched a program with HCL Technologies, which is known as DIBM powered by HCL with Orion. And that attracted talent from a lot of Tier 2, Tier 3 cities across India. From southern part of the country, from eastern part of the country for their Chennai and Noida. So can we look towards more such programs where this talent pool can be trained and then again fine-tuned by the industry? Number one, and again there is sort of internship and OJT for them to be part of the industry. Thank you.
Short answer is yes, and there's more and more. In fact, what I talked about is the talent care is actually a formal business venture in that regard, with set targets around how many people we want to get trained for the healthcare business or the pharmaceutical business. So short answer, yes, there's work happening at the corporate level, and each corporation, whether Genesis, Infosys does under the Genesis umbrella, HCL does it under the talent care umbrella, corporates will continue to do that. I think the message clearly is we again continue to be depending on IT houses for the best part, and IT tends to generally they're at the top of the talent food chain. They get to pick and choose. I think the important thing we need to remember is IT has been fishing in too many waters, depriving other industries of the core talent. And I think there is a lot of responsibility we have. And it's incredible how we've actually kind of in some sense diverted the focus of the whole education space to make it look like there's only IT and there's nothing else. That's not the idea. We need to remember there are mechanical engineers, there are civil engineers, there are economists, and there are English literature students, and there are history students. We have to find a way to not just employ them and not get into underemployment as well. So I think there's a lot more work to be done there.
Just the last question.
Yes, just last question.
My question is to Mr. Sriram. He said that we need to be very willing to what the industry expects from us. How do you quantify willingness, one? And my second question is, when you say there's a gap between what the students, their talent is, and the industry, how are the industries trying to bridge that gap? Are you trying to launch projects in college, give a hands-on project, or give them internships? So how are you trying to bridge that gap? Because there is a vicious circle. Being a fresher, I am experiencing the vicious circle. You need work. If you need work, you need experience. If you need experience, you need work. Somewhere we're caught in that. How is the industry trying to bridge that gap? That's my question.
Sure, I'll make it very short. I think first, as I said, as a student, you need to be more inquisitive. So more than academics, you need to start doing networking. You might have your seniors in your college who would have gone and joined various corporates. Do you do alumni network? Do you understand with them what's happening in industry? Do you go to their offices, spend some time with your network, and create that networking? Being in HR, we all speak that why we are in HR is because we like to work with people. But most often, after we join HR, we don't even talk to people, right? So it's important for us to do that networking from your college level itself through your seniors. It's not just networking with the industry. That's one. As in corporations, I think it's important for us also to invest on talent, right? There's nothing that substitutes talent, and it's important for us to make sure through various forums, go and talk to the placement officer, try and create a curriculum, go and do engagement with the corporates, sponsor the best students, bring them for some innovative workshops. Sometimes innovation can be only done by people who don't know about that particular subject, because they're going to bring with new ideas. So for example, in Thomson Reuters, we engage some external students to come out to our organization to come with certain innovation themes. For our surprise, they might come up with themes which are much greater impactful than people who have been sitting on innovation team for 15 years. So those are the things that I could
Thank you so much. I would personally like to thank all the panelists who have taken out their precious time to be with us today, and with all the delays, apologies to your disturbed schedule. And so to the audience, but I think we had a very, very valuable session in the first panel. All of you must have taken some pebbles in some form or the other. If I may request Shrikant, Board Member ISF, President Staffing of Manpower, to kindly come and share the mementos with our eminent personalities on the dais.